Okay, so I'm going to talk about, where did Psk Reporter come from? Where's it going? Where are we at today? Um, and yeah, if you want to stick either questions in the chat or I don't mind. Anyway, so what was the history of all of this? So I had my technician license in the early 2000s and I just could not learn code. It just didn't work for me. Maybe I tried the wrong approaches. I don't know. Um, and then the FCC dropped the code requirement in 2007. And this was great. And I thought, okay, now I can go and do the fun stuff on HF. So I got myself a 706 and a stack of QSL cards, and I hung a long wire off the back of the house. And I'm a computer guy by day. So to me, the digital mode stuff was where I wanted to be. And at that stage, it was PSK 31. And there were a couple of bits of code that basically did the encoding and decoding. And I ended up using DM780, which was Simon Brown's HB9 DRV's code, which was part of Ham Radio Deluxe. And, the first time you get on the air, you listen and you can hear people. So then you fire up the transmitter and nobody gets back to you. I mean, this is not an unusual problem, but, was my signal actually getting out? How well matched was I to my rather crappy antenna? Would turning up the power help? And within a year, I had kind of decided that the solution to this problem was some sort of tool that I could tell. So it turned out that it was a common problem. At the time, I was working for Cisco. So, that's a protocol-rich environment. So I thought, well, hey, what sort of protocol should I use to allow people to kind of report the signals that they hear? I didn't want to have a kind of beaconing system because, at the peak, that 3 kilohertz band on the 3 kilohertz bandwidth in the 20-meter band for PSK 31 was pretty congested. I didn't want automated systems transmitting in there. So the question was, can I use the existing transmissions to figure out what's going on? So this is from what, 2018, which is, okay, 10 years later, but things haven't changed much since then. If you've never played with it, this is what you can see. So this is actually looking at KP1 MGI, who's another amateur just down the road from me. And it shows, in this case, it's MSK 144, but what stations can hear him. And this is all done by the decoding software. Basically looking at the signals they're receiving and sending key information to my server when they decode something. So I picked a kind of a network management protocol because that was what I played with during the day. It's called IPFix. I forget what it stands for. It's much better known as NetFlow version 10. And this is a compact binary protocol designed for reporting things like network flows. And it's, hey, I was playing with this stuff during the day, so it was what I decided to use. And so the first version, I didn't get any support from any of the panoramic decoders that were in FLDigi or DM780. But it turns out that the way DM780 worked was that it would send Windows messages, which are these kind of internal Windows communication system, to update the UI. And you can intercept these messages. So I did, and that enabled me to extract the text that was being decoded on the fly. And, if I found the text CQ followed by something that looked like a call sign, followed by something that was the same call sign, I assumed it was a valid decode. In the PSK 31 didn't have any error correction, so there was a lot of, so noise caused all sorts of garbles. So I produced a piece of code that would handle all of this, and people started to use it. And then the author of DM780 said, hey, this is stupid. Why don't I just, call your code directly? Makes it simpler to install, just a one-click install, and there'd be a checkbox to turn it on. That was really the start of the growth of traffic. In the early days, there was very little, but once you get to a critical mass, then it becomes useful because there's enough people reporting on signals that they can hear, which means that it's likely that if you transmit, somebody will hear you. And if nobody hears you, that's a bad sign for your transmit chain. Then FLDigi, out of nowhere, they implemented the protocol and started reporting. I didn't talk to those guys. They just went off and wrote the code themselves from scratch, which I found remarkable. So this is, I wish I knew what date this was. It's kind of a captured screenshot with 2,000 monitors. You can see down here in the bottom right, we're running at about 2 billion records total since the inception of the system. We're now up at about 55 billion. So this is a long time ago. And, there's pretty good, each one of these balloons is somebody running software that's decoding traffic. And there's pretty good coverage, US, Europe. Africa is badly covered. There's some stuff in South America, and there's stuff in the Far East and Australasia. So now you have to ask yourselves, why do all these people actually run this code? And that was not obvious to me. I suspect that a bunch of people turn it on once and then they forget that they've got it turned on because it doesn't cause any problems. Maybe they're just like being charitable. But it was noticeable that once I added a leaderboard, and we'll talk about the leaderboard later, things really picked up. As some wise marketer once said, it's surprising what people will do for free internet points. So I'm sure that some of you run this stuff. I'm grateful for it, but I think the thing is, this is a community, and it's about the users. So how do you get started in using this stuff? Do you just want to monitor the traffic, or are you trying to exchange messages as well, in which case you're a kind of a user on the other side? This is a two-sided market. Do you want to try for a leaderboard position? I'll tell you for free, that's becoming more difficult over time. Do you want to spend any money? What have you got already? So the very simplest setup was this one that I set up on my coffee table. But that's a Sony shortwave radio that I bought in 1985 that supports SSB. And there's a Mac laptop next to it, and there's no connection between the two devices. It just goes out the loudspeaker of the radio and in through the microphone of the laptop. And as you can see, running WSJTX, you decode signals, you see stuff. Um, you can see where you're receiving from. Yes, it's not as long range as if you have a nice, good antenna, but this is just a standard, 2 foot extendable lying flat on a coffee table. So if all you want to do is monitor, you can do some really simple system like that. Now we start going up market. There's a bunch of people using boxes from Red Pitaya. They produce some basically FPGA with high-speed analog front ends. There's a couple of relevance to the amateur radio community. There's the SDR lab, which is a 16-bit sampling receiver. And then there's a 14-bit one that came out first. The key thing about these is they have large FPGAs that allow you to do a lot of signal processing, and there's a dual core processor in there, and it's got enough memory. And this guy, Pavel Demin, who is in Eastern Europe somewhere, decided that wouldn't it be cool to turn this into a dedicated Psk Reporter monitoring box? And so he built the FPGA code that decodes, that first captures 16 3 kilohertz channels, where you can configure those anywhere from potentially 0 up to 60 megs. It filters and downsamples and eventually feeds the data, the IQ data, into the CPU, where the CPU then runs basically the decoder part of WSJTX. And then there's a little script that takes that decoded stuff and feeds it into Psk Reporter. That's all this box does. And now you're monitoring up to 16 bands at the same time. Now, there aren't 16 bands of interest, but hey. Oops, I went too far. So this is what mine looks like. It has thermal problem, hence the kind of the rather grotty glued on AliExpress heat sinks. There's one other connection. It needs a USB-C power supply and an Ethernet and an antenna connection, and that's it. You configure it once with your call sign and locator, and then you just leave it running. It stays, it's reliable. It runs until I have a power failure. So now that was kind of one of the first kind of hardware packages for doing reporting to Psk Reporter. Since then, people are now becoming very keen on using the RX 888, which again is, it's a direct sampling receiver, but it just uses a USB 3 connection to transfer the samples over to a CPU. As it comes, it also suffers from thermal issues. So unless you actually take steps to improve the thermals, people run it at 64 megasamples a second. Then you have to run it into something, typically an x86 box. The mini PCs you can find on Amazon for $200-300 are perfectly adequate. Essentially, the easy package to install is Whisper Daemon from AI6VM. It captures and logs FT4, FT8, Whisper. It does monitoring of WWV and WWVH. And that may be it at the moment. There's actually plenty of spare CPU. The underpinning of this is KA9Q radio, which is a remarkable piece of software. It takes in the entire 64 megs or 128 megs samples and can generate essentially an unlimited number of decoded channels of any bandwidth that you like. And in fact, for the FT8 and FT4 channels, we pull out 100 kilohertz slices and feed them into the decoders. Because not everybody operates FT4 and FT8 in the kind of standard bands, especially for DXpeditions. And this means that you don't need to worry about configuring for the DXpedition as an extra band. It'll pick it up. And so this is kind of my setup. This is the RX 888. Again, with thermals, kind of, I added a fan on the top, a thermostatically controlled fan to try and keep the thing cool. It works best with a GPS referenced clock because that allows you to do precise measurements of WWV on the various frequencies, and you can spot then the Doppler shift in the ionosphere as the layers move around. And you get sort of 1, 2, maybe 3 hertz changes in the received frequency. And then this is a B-Link, cheap, fast mini PC, came with Windows. You wipe that and install the Linux and it just works. So that's that's the size of stuff that I do. The big guys, one of the guys who nearly appears at the top of the leaderboard is DL0PF. This is his configuration. He has multiple antennae, multiple radios doing stuff. Some AirSpy stuff. There's a LoRa radio. I don't know what he does with that. Then down here, he runs 3 of the red Pataya boards. And he is within the top 2 or 3 every day of the leaderboard. And the leaderboard is basically, how many different signals did you spot over the last 24 hours or 7 days? How many different countries did you spot? This requires serious dedication. It's also really helpful, I think, being in Europe, because very few of the top people are in the US. I suspect that it's just easier to get signals in Europe. So this is kind of the standard user interface. It shows my limited skill in HTML design, but you fill out what you want. And the typical thing is on all bands, show signals sent or received by the call sign me using all modes over the last 3 hours. And this is basically the people I have heard in the last 3 hours. And it's sort of satisfying to see that. You can see this is a more recent capture. We have 48 billion records down here saved. 7,000 active monitors, up from the 2,000 in the earlier days. Now you get a lot more multi-band monitors. Maybe you can see this is my big balloon here, and you can see it's got multiple colors in it. Each of the colors represents a band. People keep on asking for new bands. I'm actually red-green colorblind, and the penalty for asking for a new band is you have to pick a color that's not been used before. And we're running short of colors. Now, there's a bunch of kind of options that which are used to kind of theme the layout. The pink blob is shown by default. It was an early idea to try and show where your majority of signals were, where you were being heard. And it's kind of an arc centered on you. It's supposed to be kind of represent skip zones or something like that. It never worked very well. It has, basically, you can just experiment with these. You can turn on and off the nighttime shadow. There are city lights, gimmick. Hide connecting lines. Basically, that shows the path between the receiver and the transmitter. It tends to kind of auto pan and zoom over time to keep the interesting stuff on the screen. But if you're trying to do a video, a screen capture video, every 5 minutes to get a day's worth of traffic, then you want to turn that on. We'll talk about the map type. You get to see the band colors and you can change them, but maybe you can now see the problem that we have a lot of colors, we have a lot of bands. I mean, I have no idea what 76 gigs is up here. And then if you're receiving and you're receiving on multiple frequencies, then you get all those colors in your icon. The sparklies indicate that it's a recent one. So if you're looking for, what's happened recently, you get to see that. You can choose to see those. Okay, the map, this is the kind of the standard map that everybody's used to from using Google Maps. It's the Mercator projection, but it's not good for radio stuff because the path from North America to Northern Europe does not go this way. It probably goes north of Iceland. So you don't get to see. So there are two options. You can draw a picture of the world with you, because you're the most important person, at the center. So this is the center. And the great thing now is that all the paths to and from you are straight lines. So yes, indeed, to Northern Europe, actually it looks like it's just going to clip Iceland. Down to Australia, yeah, north of Seattle, down to Australia. Now, there's two different ways of representing the world. One is where the distances scale. So this path to Australia is much longer than this path to, I don't know whether those are the Canary Islands or something over there. Looks to be about 2.5 times as long. The flip downside of this is that Australia, which is here, looks absolutely huge. I mean, it looks as big as Africa, and it definitely isn't. So there's another way of drawing this map, which is where you get the areas right, but the distances are now not right. Again, still, you're in the middle. This is the distance to the Canaries, and it seems further than it was in the other map. And Australia is kind of really scrunched on the edge up here, and is nothing like as big as Africa. There aren't really black holes around the North Pole and the South Pole, in spite of what some people believe. And the shadow, of course, is a completely different shape. So, you get the choice. Which do you want to use? And it's horses for courses. Now, I like the odd sort of Easter egg. And so during a solar eclipse, it actually draws the eclipse shadow and the shadow of the moon on the surface. And this is a tweet from some Japanese, well, actually maybe a Japanese US licensee being surprised that this happened. I managed to load all the eclipses in there for the next 50 years, so I don't have to tamper with it. So Psk Reporter, as you might imagine, the name comes from Psk 31. And this is a chart over 3 years of the percentage of reports by mode. At the beginning of 2015, it was maybe 70% JT65, which was, I think it was 1 minute cycles. So it took a time to get a full QSO, but it was what people were using. Then at this point, which was kind of the summer of 2017, FT8 was launched. And within 6 months, it was 95% of all the traffic we were seeing. The adoption was incredibly rapid. Now, this wasn't the fact that it was different software, because they were both, as I recall, WSJT versions, and they both had the Psk reporting built in. It was just that people jumped on FT8 and really started using it, which did cause problems, which we'll come to later. So how much traffic are we talking about? This is a graph of a week from earlier on this year. It's a pretty typical week. So the peak's sort of up here. This is 2.25 million reports saved per hour, which is about 400 records a second. Now, I don't save all the records that I get. If somebody is calling CQ on FT8, they do that every 30 seconds. I don't record that. If somebody who is listening, hears them on the top of the minute, they report that, that's fine. Then they report it again 30 seconds later. I ignore those. There's a limit on the frequency of any particular report from a particular monitoring station. And, that gives me a factor of 4, basically, data reduction. This is still quite a lot of data. So again, same sort of time period, the number of simultaneous people reporting, it sort of peaks at around 9,000. That is people who have their radios on and are listening, or they're running dedicated reporting systems. To be honest, they're mostly running WSJTX. I don't know whether they leave their radios on while they're not using it. I haven't done a deep study into whether that's, the fact there's a strong diurnal variation tells me that people are turning their radios off. From here to here, that's a 4,000 drop. So 4,000 people have stopped reporting over this time period, and they start again the following day. What's going on? I don't know. It's just an observation. So these are counts of modes over 2 hours. You can see FT8 is the clear winner. There are some software that reports Whisper. Most of the Whisper traffic goes to WhisperNet. Some of it comes to me. I don't know why. There's a CW skimmer that can report. So those are CW reports from CW skimmer. And then you get down into the the fact there's a bunch of meteor scatter here, maybe it was a good day. Maybe it's just all ground wave, I don't know. And I don't even know what some of these protocols are. I mean, the system is entirely agnostic to the protocols, effectively. It's just a string, up to 8 characters long. So this is a piece of the leaderboard. These guys at the top, they're seeing 200 DX entities in 24 hours. That tells me that, hey, if you could get people to come back to you, you could get your DXCC in a day. A hard-working day, but it seems doable. And I would love to see somebody try and do that. Because, I mean, you can see that, well, here, K1RA is the first US but there's not many. That was, well, K1RA appears twice. I don't know what the difference is. There's 3 US people in the top 15 or so, which is not many when you look at where the rest are. So how many distinct people do we see? Over a week, almost 30,000 different call signs using WS, reporting using WSJTX, which is a lot of people. Again, I don't know what some of these other bits of software are. They typically integrated without talking to me. They found some code. The WSJTX code is not a good base to start because it's all written in Fortran. Even the reporting to Psk Reporter. There are now some libraries in Python to do the reporting. So it's easier for people to do that integration. So this is the area that I'm from. There's 2 people in my same 6-character grid, so you can't see me because I'm underneath. It's one of these 2. I think it's this one. But you can see there's a bunch of people in the area, and it's quite a dense area, and there's some people doing multi-band listening. It was after I started looking at these maps, I realized that the 6-character group locator meant that a lot of people ended up on top of each other. And so to separate, this pair of people, if you enter an 8-character locator, then you often end up slightly displaced from somebody with the same 6-character locator. So you can see yourself on the map. So how have things changed over the years? This is the number of reports per day starting in probably 2014. And there's a strong, there's indications of, variations. I don't know whether this is sunspot related, whether it's related to the time of year, whether people in the summer turn off their monitoring because they were nervous about storms coming through in their antenna and they don't want to leave their radio attached. Is it just growth? Is it school year? I have no idea what causes these quite significant changes in the number of reports per day. There's something going on. I'm not a big data guy, so I don't know how to analyze this stuff and figure out what's going on. Or is this actually just increasing traffic? The answer is no, because the number of monitors is also increasing. And this this is kind of a different shape of graph. It seems more linear than the other one, which to me is maybe this section here is linear. Doesn't quite look like it. This has still got growth in the number of monitors by date. So there's this variation on a yearly basis. I don't know what it means. Something that a nice grad student could probably figure out and maybe write a paper on. Okay, so for the geeky stuff, this is kind of the conceptual architecture. Your radio reports to your software, which sends UDP packets over the internet to me. There's two types of communication over the internet. There's UDP and TCP. TCP is guaranteed delivery. There's a lot more packet overhead. You set up a connection. It's what the browser uses to talk to websites. But you have to deal with, well, the operating system deals with packet loss, but it imposes a certain amount of overhead. With UDP, you just send a packet and either it gets there or it doesn't. And because there's actually a lot of duplicated data between these packets, it really doesn't matter. And it makes life easy for the implementer on the software side, and to be honest, on my side as well. So then we kind of receive the packets, stuff them into a queue, effectively decode them, stuff the data into a database. There's a lot of murkiness around locators and trying to figure out if you hear somebody, where they are. Sometimes you get the locator, in particular in FTH, you typically get the locator of the person who is transmitting. In other protocols, you often don't get the locator. So there's kind of a lookup system, and then there are some maintenance scripts. At least this is the conceptual architecture. Now, in fact, it's much worse than that, as you might imagine. It turned out that the UDP path sometimes is very lossy. In particular, if you're operating marine mobile with a satellite link, it tends to throw UDP packets away at the drop of a hat. So you can now actually connect using TCP. It's more overhead. It complicates things a bit, but there it automatically does retransmissions. And so if you are marine mobile on a ship somewhere because you're an amateur radio guy on a tanker, you can now get your messages through. Otherwise, stuff it in a queue, decode the packets. There is the horrible fact that many people don't connect their radios properly to their software, and so they report the wrong frequency. This is most annoying to kind of the 6-meter guys who go suddenly, oh, there's an amazing 6-meter opening, and they complain that the opening just isn't there. And it turns out it was because somebody was reporting traffic. They were receiving it on 20 meters, but reporting it as being on 6 meters. Now, we'll talk about the details later. I now actually, there's yet more queues to try and get the data into the database so that it doesn't back up at, 400 reports a second. We also save all the reports in tab-separated values files like CSV files, only using tabs, which I keep for a few months. And we'll talk a bit more about why that happens. So the good news about people reporting the wrong band is that nearly every FT8 transmission, I reckon, in the world gets reported, that has a CQ in it, gets reported to me multiple times. This means we can vote on which the right frequency is. If three people say it's on 20 meters and one person says it's on 6 meters, that one person is wrong, because in practice, people don't transmit their same CQ in the same time slot on multiple frequencies. Once you do that, then you can start assigning kind of reliability scores to people based on, how often are they right. So if I detect that one person was reported the signal on 6 meters, but I don't think is the case, and then he reports another signal on 6 meters that other people have reported on 20 meters, essentially then I start ignoring his frequency reports on 6 meters because they're just wrong. And that happens even if nobody else reports that particular transmission. And it's quite high. It's 1 to 2% of all reporters are reporting the wrong frequency. And hey, I suppose I can't complain, but I do complain. It would be nice if people configure their cat connection on their radios so that the software controlled the radio, or at least reported the right frequency. So the packets that get sent, it's a pretty standard binary protocol. There's RFCs, which are the Internet Standards documents that describe how you create these packets. You create the packet, you send it, you're done. It happens that Wireshark, which is a standard tool used for debugging network protocols, can debug this protocol. It shows that, people can define their own attributes, such as the sending call sign. And so I have an ID that identifies as being me, type 1. This looks like AE8S, some letter like that far down the alphabet. That's a call sign. This one is almost certainly the frequency. It's a bit fiddly, but hey, it's a lot less fiddly than all the signal processing that you have to do if you're writing decoding software. So what do I have now? There's basically a few big tables in the database. There's a record for every station that I've heard that's reported or has been reported. Unfortunately, most of them are false decodes. You only ever hear them once. They're bad. Their call signs don't exist. WSJTX or FT8 as a whole does a pretty good job with the error correction, but if you turn the error correction all the way up to max, you do get false decodes for call signs that only one person reports, and it's never reported again. And they often have a lot of kind of slashes in them. So again, the big table is 55 billion rows of reports. I only keep the last week or so online, and the rest gets archived in a really bad format, unfortunately. I'd like to redo that. But there's a table that maps call signs to LOTW and EQSL statuses. For LOTW, it knows the last upload date, so it knows whether you're kind of active, and it shows that in the little bubbles. And then there's the DX entity table, which there are a surprising number of times where the call sign and the locator don't match the DX entity that the call sign belongs to. So something must be wrong. So the output side, it runs 20 copies of a query script written in Perl, because at the time that's what I was using. Talks to the database and returns the data to the web front end. There's a statistics page which shows you lots of summary statistics. And there's a streaming interface. So the approved way of getting basically the full data stream or a subset of it is to use the MQTT interface. MQTT is really an IoT protocol, Internet of Things, but it's a publish-subscribe system. This one was actually implemented by M0 LTE in the UK. It has documentation, and you can subscribe to topics. You know, this topic here is, you know, all the signals sent by SV8 DCW, and you get them live effectively, or as live as I get them. You can subscribe to multiple topics on a single connection. You know, you can filter different ways. Basically, each of these things between the slashes is basically a filter. So this is on 10 meters, FT8. Don't care about the call signs and locators, but this is the DXID US and UK. And there are, you know, people have built websites based on this technology. And this service gets the data from a real-time stream, which is, you need an API key to get to, because it's actually quite heavy load. And you get one report per line in this format. So this row is what? JK1 OZS to JI1 SZR, the two locators, the software the receiver was using, WSJTX 1.8.0. This is the Unix, this is the Unix timestamp. And there's a problem here that it wasn't clear initially whether this is the start of the transmission or the end of the transmission. And some bits of software have chosen the start, some have chosen the end. I think by the fact this has got a 4 at the end, it's almost certainly WSJTX is at the end. And I have a terrible table that figures out which time slot things were in particular, because you need that for verifying the frequencies in the QRG detector. So there is, you know, compressed files of all the data received, basically before any of the checks are done. And this data is now imported into the Madrigal data store, which is a, I think it's an ionospheric studies, maybe just be a general space studies data store, where people can use it for looking at propagation or whatever they want. And a bunch of this stuff was actually driven by the 2 eclipses from I guess, a couple of years ago now, um, because an eclipse is a great uh, sort of test case to seeing what happens to the ionosphere when it gets dark unexpectedly. It's not an experiment that you can conduct with big pieces of, I don't know, fabric. You wait for the sun and the moon to do it for you. And so people were encouraged to leave their radios on during the eclipse. And then the paths would come and go, during that time. And the ham sci community seemed very excited by it. So now operating this service is, never as easy as it seems. For a few years, basically, whenever I went on vacation in the summer, the system would die, and that would cause problems. Initially, the machine was hosted in my basement, connected to a Comcast cable connection. So yeah, July 2014, we lose power in a summer storm. UPS doesn't hold it up for enough. But KF5WAY came out the woodwork and said, "Hey, I work for Rackspace, and we get free hosting at Rackspace. Do you want to host there?" And so that was great. After a few years, he quit Rackspace, which left me I needed to find somewhere else. VA3 ISP came through. Then I'm on vacation and the FT8 thing happens. And this causes terrible performance problems. People would complain that, if I just look at the last 15 minutes, I don't see any spots. And that turned out to be because the queue that I had between receiving the report and actually getting it into the database was over an hour long. So yes, you didn't see current data. So the simplest thing to do was to add this processing delay message, and sometimes at the bottom of the screen you see that it says, "Hey, I'm 30 minutes behind. Sorry," but that's the explanation. Then I added the Eclipse stuff, and that caused rendering problems on no end of people's systems. There's a lot of different types of systems out there. This is nothing unusual if you're producing a commercial software product, but this is just me in my basement tinkering with it. Then I get the FT8 thing causes database size issues. I only have so much disk space on this box. So again, migrate to a new, faster server provided by somebody else. Then in 2021, actually twice, we ran out of disk space because the maintenance jobs stopped working. And kind of the one key thing about a database engine is don't lose data. But twice it managed to throw away the main table with a lot of effort and patching of things. I managed to recover it both times, but it was extremely nerve-wracking. And today, just the traffic growth, you saw those graphs earlier on of the amount of data I get, requires tweaking bits of the implementation just to keep it running. So the day-night terminator, when I implemented that, I wanted to experiment with WebGL. This is basically using the GPU that's part of basically every graphics card these days, often not a very good GPU, to compute basically compute the sun angle. And then you can then shade the edge. And so basically, if the sun is more than 5 degrees above the horizon, it's fully bright. If it's more than 5 degrees below the horizon, it's fully dark, or maybe 2 degrees, I can't recall. But in between that, it gets darker so that the edge of the terminator is actually being rendered correctly. And it turns out if you're doing this, it's just a little bit more code to see whether there's an eclipse going on. If there's an eclipse, is the moon between you, the particular pixel, and the sun. And if the moon is partially obscuring, then you can render that as well. The whole issue around gamma, if any of you have done, computer graphics stuff, it turns out that the mapping of pixel values to display brightness is not linear. It's roughly a square law. And this means that kind of naive things saying, well, if the sun is 1 degree above the horizon, it's half as bright as if it's 2 degrees above the horizon. Yeah, that doesn't actually translate to the pixel value is a factor of 2 different. There are details, as you might think, beyond details. So the way it actually works is that a GPU essentially runs a piece of code for every pixel inside a shape, and the shapes are triangles. And so you make long, thin triangles that cover one row, and it's amazing. It goes fast. It renders, the million or so pixels in 10 milliseconds or something on a desktop. However, not all GPUs are the same. Desktop systems tend to support 32-bit floating point, which is great. The phones tend to support 16-bit floating point, and that just doesn't work as well. There's less precision, and when you're kind of near the edge of the terminator, you get artifacts which look terrible. Then, of course, people complain. And, hey, you get what you pay for. You're not paying for this. I try to fix these things when I can. There's this example here, CB radios. I had no idea people were spotting CB radio with this stuff. I'm missing when 11 meter is selected. They're shown with all bands. Yeah, it turned out that my mapping of 11 meters was incorrect and didn't cover the CB band. Okay. Very occasionally people say, do I have a way to donate? And the answer is really no. Although that may change in the future. So one of the tricky things is figuring out whether a call sign, especially if it includes a slash in it, where is it, which DX entity is it in? So people were stations like, N1DQ/LH. Now, is that I mean, the LH is not a valid call sign. So LH is a Norwegian prefix. So I was thinking those were Norwegian, but it turns out that that's not the case. It turns out LH actually stands for lighthouse. Well, I didn't know that. We had a long discussion on one of the mailing lists, and finally somebody said, oh, LH, lighthouse, of course. Didn't you know that? So now what's the way forward from here? People want more capabilities. They want fancier reporting. They want different visualizations. They want to keep more data online. occasionally I've had, the national sort of telecom regulator say, "Oh, do you have any information about this call sign on this date? We're trying to investigate whether that person was doing something they shouldn't have been doing." Um, and unless they do it within a few days, the answer is it's not easy to get to. And typically they go away at that point. Um, I'd like to get, I've been doing this for basically 20 years. Um, I'd like to build a team to own, manage, and operate the service. Um, right now, we are dependent, or I am rather dependent on the goodwill of people who operate, hosting services to give me free hosting, but that's not really the path forward. Now, the ARDC does make grants to amateur radio projects. However, they really like funding CapEx and not OpEx. It's possible that we could get money for a couple of years to sort of transition over to a funded model, but how do we get funding? Not clear. I don't want advertising. That's just, I'm an old school web person, so I hark back to the days before advertising ruined everything. Do we want to merge with other services like WhisperNet? I don't know. I mean, there's a bunch of there's the people who run POTA, Parks on the Air, and the SOTA stuff. They have similar problems. There is kind of the high altitude ballooning community. There's a bunch of these kind of services that maybe there's a way of, I don't know, combining them. I don't know. Should we actually try and fill in the sparse areas of the map? I don't know. Do we want to record more data? I mean, it's sort of tempting to say, why don't we record all FT8 traffic, not just who's transmitting, who's calling CQ, but let's just record every single packet and save all the unique packets, which actually is probably not that much data because lots of people will report the same packet. What would we do with that? I've no idea. But I didn't know what people would do with Psk Reporter when I started that either. So I'm looking for volunteers as well. Since Whisper Daemon now supports FT4 and FT8 and reports, they are working with HamSci to install systems in the Southern Hemisphere, which is good. And they want to have at least 5 in Antarctica, which is great. DP0 GVN and DP0 GVN1 are multiband monitors in Antarctica. So you can see, does my FT8 signal reach Antarctica? Which I think is cool. So that's it. Questions? Okay, actually, let me look at the chat. Anybody doing statistical analysis? No. Any volunteers? Yes. No, I have not considered creating a Windows app. I don't know what. I think there are people. So Grid Tracker takes a real-time feed from me, and they have a different interface. I don't know whether it's a Windows app or just another website. Yeah, the settings are stored in cookies. I try and store them in other places as well, so that if you're one of those people that wipes the cookies at the end of each session, it tries to stick around. The way to actually get the settings to stick, if you don't like cookies, is there's a link, there's a underlying thing saying permalink. And if you click on that, it puts all the settings into the URL, and then you can just bookmark that URL and you get the same set of settings each time. Seeing faults on multiple fundamental frequency. Oh, yes, that would be interesting. Yes, interesting. The MH370 thing. Oh, I think some people have done some remarkable stuff with the satellite telemetry that the monitoring that they've got. I would, there's aspects that I would like to do in terms of figuring out can I locate a transmitter with time delay based on when people receive it? If you have a GPS locked clock and we kind of know what your signal processing delay is, WSJTX does compute a delta T. With enough of those, could you kind of locate the transmitter? Unfortunately, there are idiots who transmit call signs with naughty words, such that I actually have to have a table of naughty words that, if you invent a call sign, if your real call sign has a naughty word in it, I'm very sorry. You're going to be screwed. I can certainly give you a copy of the slides. Okay, anybody else have any other questions?
Anybody else? Well,
any volunteers to help me move this thing forward?
I just had a quick question because while I was listening, I just went to SSB and I didn't see any reports there. Does it do SSB? I'm sorry, I guess I'm a little new to the whole thing.
Okay, if there's an entry in the drop down for a mode, then that mode has been seen within the last 24 hours. I have no idea what software would report an SSB signal.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, I'm doing some experiments with, can I have code that extracts voice channels out of, the 20-meter voice chunk, and then runs them through a voice-to-text recognizer, and can I spot the call sign of the transmitting person? The answer is not, doesn't work very well, / really hardly at all. But I think that if you're into that sort of, I think it would be possible to build a system that would listen to voice traffic and without having to overlay, say, a bunch of PL tone. I mean, I could see a system where you used PL tones at the beginning of every transmission to send your call sign. But that's going to require a bunch of people to change software or hardware or whatever.
I was thinking about that, something very similar to that. By the way, great presentation, Philip. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Philip.
The whole world of software-defined radio is rapidly evolving. And, if you fast forward another 10 years or more, whatever, hopefully the hobby will still be, active. And even though many of us may not be here, I can certainly imagine a digital radio that could encode on top of your analog signal, on top of your SSB signal, a digital footprint that would be invisible to the casual listener, but could be picked out by software such as a WSJT type software. And because you have an SDR in most of these new radios, the software can look at a big chunk of spectrum and analyze it that way and not have to be focused on a single narrow band like we do with FT8. So when someone dials a random SSB frequency and starts talking, his radio could automatically be adding a digital footprint to that transmission. And then a receiver on the other end could see that in the spectrum and decode it.
I think that will be actually really cool. I can see for DX chasing, you leave your radio on and going, hey, if this entity shows any call sign from this entity shows up, alert me right now. That will be pretty slick.
It'll be interesting to see how that goes. There's so much change going on now. And I mean, I'm always talking to people who don't like FT8. Oh, that's not ham radio and da, 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 da. And my standard answer is, well, you better embrace it because that's what every new ham is doing. And, and they like computers and they grew up with computers and this is where it is.
Yeah. I mean, the number of licensees in the US is growing and not shrinking, which I find incredibly optimistic. It's not clear to me what they're all doing. But I mean, and now, with, I don't know if any of you guys are into the Meshtastic, Meshcore, kind of the LoRa, the unlicensed LoRa radios, which allow for basically building digital meshes over not wide areas, but kind of local areas. So I'm sort of 10-mile range in the 900 megahertz band, ISM band. And, you can get, actually, I've got one. Yeah. So this device, which kind of looks like an old school BlackBerry, is actually a Meshtastic radio. And, if you're in Boston, you see all sorts of traffic. And you can just message people. It's peer-to-peer messaging with relays through other people if they can extend your reach. And these systems are cheap. And I view them as a way that the kids can get into a different form of it's not a one of these. It's a off-grid. If you're going hiking and you're worried about getting lost, something like this, which has a reasonable range. Yeah, it's 900 megs, so it's not super great at getting through foliage and stuff, but it's a device that works off-grid.
I do have one technical question, or I had a couple, but I won't hog everything. So the code that you talk about is pretty complicated. There's a lot of decoding and a lot of graphical processing and all kinds of stuff. I'm not enough of a web guy to know how web programs work, but it can't be all HTML.
No, it's mostly JavaScript.
Okay. And so when we log into the website, it downloads these modules, and that's where the code executes.
Yes. Basically, all the rendering code, the map drawing, all of that stuff happens inside your browser, which makes it a real pain to debug. If it doesn't happen on my box, it's difficult to debug when it happens on your box.
Right.
I do get error logging for when things blow up, but I've gotten rid of basically all the simple errors, and now they're the really, really weird errors that I don't understand what has gone wrong. That, halfway through, the map object just vanishes. What happened? I mean, hey, I can understand the map object doesn't get created right at the start, but once it's created, I don't have anything that can get rid of it. But suddenly I suspect that a lot of it is caused by running out of memory on people's machines. That, the browser goes, oh shit, I ran out of memory.
Yeah.
Something's gonna die.
I suspect you're probably close to that because a lot of folks are running all this software on old computers, low power machine. I just upgraded my own and it's working way better. The last question I had, which I posted, have you considered creating a Windows version of this tool?
No, when I started out, I was a Windows guy. Now I've been exclusively a Mac guy. I'm a Mac Linux guy for the last 15 years. And Windows is not my my preferred platform. It would be interesting to try and encapsulate a version of the website into a Windows executable that could be distributed that way. I suspect that you could do that. The problem with that approach is that people then end up running old versions of the executable. And right now, well, this is a separate problem. Right now, most people are running a version that was within the last week or so that I fixed a bug. Everybody naturally ends up using it. Having said that, there are people still running versions from 2014, and I have no idea where they get them from, because they certainly don't get them from me. But my version logging shows this. And they're all in Japan.
Mm.
What does that mean? I have not the faintest idea.
They must be getting it from a Windows cache or something, or internet cache.
Well, now you mention it, I'm wondering whether somebody did take a version of the website, package it into an executable, and distribute it.
Ah.
And that's why it won't update.
Huh. Well, sure is a powerful tool. It's quite amazing. And I, for one, would be happy to contribute, on a periodic basis if you decided to, try to find a way to monetize it in some way.
Yeah, I think is the only long-term solution, is to build, a team of maybe 3 or 4 people with different roles in terms of maintenance, design, promotion, kind of fundraising, to actually enable us to. I mean, this thing is running right on the edge.
Yeah. Would there be any interest? Would there be any interest among the major manufacturers of ham radio gear for you to sell cleansed data? There's, I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's some value. You have so much data. It's got to be valuable to somebody. And
so at the last show I was at, I was talking to the Flex radio guys, and they said, "Oh, thank you very much for doing this. It's great." But that was about the limit of their appreciation. And the great thing for me is, since nobody pays if I don't deal with your issue for a couple of weeks or a month, or I forget about it, it doesn't give me heartburn. I think if people were, especially if they said, "Hey, here's my contribution, fix this bug," I would, it's a different way of feeling about it.
Bill,
Yes.
you're always going to have naysayers, FT8, FT4, not real ham radio, but I saw an interesting statement recently, and the fellow said, if a ham radio is involved, it is ham radio. And I can remember years ago when single sideband made its appearance, the AM guy said, it's a fad, it'll never last. So this has been going on for a long, long time, and it will continue to go on as the hobby evolves and grows.
Need to democratize the argument about that, because it may be ham radio, but for some people it's not their ham radio, and I think that's fair. Everybody has a choice about what they consider it to be, whether it contains a ham radio or not. Can I just come in, because I got to go soon? It's getting late over here. 10:30. Philip, thank you very much. That was a terrific presentation. I was interested. I'm a tech guy. I wrote protocols for the internet a long time ago in a previous life, the border gateway routers, and lots of other stuff in between. So of a tech nature. So I was really interested in the sort of the design decisions and the decisions you've made over the period of years about how to do this. I mean, everything from UDP because it's less work through to web. Do it in the web browser rather than make a Windows version and a Linux version and a Mac version and an iOS version and all those sort of crap. And all of the other decisions that there were lots of design decisions in there that you sort of either explicitly mentioned or were in there implicitly in terms of how you said it worked. And I thought it was a fantastic expose of how to go about the right decisions. I think things like the platform you do it for example. I mean, as you said, it's different about how you feel about it, but it's also it also changes the maintenance job that you've got and things like this. People don't always think about that. And I love the point about not charging for it, because when you charge for it, people expect something in return. We've got the opposite phenomenon with our regulator over here now. I don't know about you and with the FCC, but certainly with Ofcom, we don't pay for our ham license, so we don't get any service from the regulator. So if something isn't to our liking, then it's tough luck. So I think it works. It works really well that way. And I know I don't know what stage of life and thing you want to enjoy, but I know other people who are developing software who are getting to the second half of their life now where they're not working anymore, and they want to do it as a hobby. They don't want to do it as a business. So I appreciate all of those things, and it was a terrific presentation, both on the aspects that I learned a lot about. Psk Reporter that I didn't know before, even though I've used it. And I think that's probably true of most people who are listening to this or who see the presentation afterwards, that there's much more behind the scenes to it, not just on the organizational and the way the effort needed to run it, but in the technical architecture and all these other things. So I mean, I could have made a list of questions like Bruce, as long as we armed technically about how things work, but I can't even remember the one I was going to ask now. But no, thank you very much for your time and for the presentation. I thought it was great.
You say the technical decisions that I made, they were often made without much thought. I mean, in my day job, I'm the chief architect at a software as a service startup, and there we do things the right way and not the most expedient way. When you're doing it yourself, running costs are kind of important. I mean, my gut tells me that it's $300 a month plus in terms of donated services, and over 20 years, that's actually quite a lot of money.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've got clubs that run their websites on people who happen to run a Linux server or whatever, and know the security aspects and give them free space on it, and they wouldn't run a website if they had to pay for it. They're so smaller concerns that the only way they can do it on the goodwill and generosity of other people. So,
I mean, but I think that's true for an awful lot of these services. I mean, you need to fund them somehow, and whether that's through the generosity of somebody. And if it's a small static website, that's fine. If it's, I mean, this is an 8-core system with 32 gigs of RAM on it, with mirrored SSDs and all sorts of shit. and it's run out of steam. So now, admittedly, it's a fairly old architecture box. So moving to an equivalent, EC2 instance would give me lots more headroom. But now we're probably talking a $2 an hour instance. And, you have a separate machine doing the database, and that's another $1 an hour. So those sort of costs add up really quick. For a business, that's fine because you're selling your services. But for this sort of stuff. Yeah.
I wonder if it has to get bigger, actually. I wonder if it's sort of probably grown because you could do this or people have asked for this or whatever. But I mean, the amount of, if you went back to reporting PSK like you did originally, it would probably fit all on a nice server that you could run in the bedroom sort of thing. I mean, it's only because it's added to stuff and how many people actually use all of the facilities that it's got. A lot of people are, I guess, looking at a quick snapshot of where have I been heard, the stuff. And if there's enough infrastructure to make that happen, I don't know whether there's any more distributed infrastructure that could happen or whatever. Or to move stuff to the edge or all these sorts of questions. But
the answer is I'm sure there is. But, I work on this in 15-minute chunks.
Yeah, quite. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so... and that's why a team would be good, because you could ask and answer and discuss the options before making significant changes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
I have one more question that you've probably heard a million times. And have you thought about adding cat control so that the site could automatically pick up the frequency and the band and the mode?
Well, I don't have any code that runs on the user's system. However, there is a facility that tells you for your 4-character locator, which is the band with the most traffic on it at the moment. And it's kind of a frequency. If you go to zip FREQ, let me just verify that this is right. I think it's frec.pskreporter.info. FREQ.pskreporter.info. It tries to geolocate you, figure out where you are. You can actually pass in the grid that you're interested in, and then in 10 kilohertz slots, it tells you the number of. I forget how it works, but I know that Grid Tracker is a big user of this API, and they show it to people in that display.
There is a utility out there that I use, which I've talked about a lot on these calls, which I actually love, that conceptually at least could enable you to do what we were just talking about. It's a utility called CatSync. And what CatSync does is it puts a cat shell around the website. And so you run CatSync and then you launch the website inside their program. Like I use it. It basically is designed for the web SDRs.
Okay.
So you run the web SDR website inside their shell and it connects via OmniRig to your rig. And now the external website SDR will track the frequency of your radio. So, they're kind of doing it in reverse.
They're doing it in reverse, yes.
But it does work both ways. So you can change the frequency on the web SDR and it will change your radio to that frequency.
That's interesting.
It's called CatSync. It's made by...
I found it. I might talk to those guys and see if they want to add an integration.
I've talked to him. They're pretty. He's a German guy. He's pretty responsive.
Okay. I will reach out to him.
Yeah, the other quick thing I was going to mention, sorry, in your, I forget what page it was now, but there was a slide you had where you said there were, I think it was the bits of software that were, sorry, I don't know what you call them,
Yeah.
the bits of software that were reporting these things. So there were things like SDR and some that were further down the list with near the bottom that were only about 200 and something. And that will be Marcus's remote software that he's been doing, DL8BE, is it? I can't remember if call off the top of my head. And he's brought out recently some remote software for iPad and Mac. For K4, for ICOM, and for Yaesu, and so that's built in. He's built your stuff into that, so you can turn on PSK Reporter within each of those. So that will be a lot of people who are doing. I mean, they might only be doing remote from their lounge to the shack, or they might be on the other side of the world. I don't know from their radios. I use it a lot to do demos to people and to train people and stuff like that, and it's very useful. So my point was his software has only been recently developed, so therefore he will have only a lower number of things, but that will grow over time. And so there is a component in that table that you had which is related not just to the number of things and how popular it is, but how long that software has been available with PSK Reporter built into it, which you're probably aware of. But
what I find remarkable is that people are building these integrations without talking to me. That
I find that remarkable as well, because if I wanted to integrate it, I'd come to you.
Well, I do have a page, on the website that talks about how to integrate it and examples and stuff.
Right. They probably think I won't bother him. I'll just do what he says on his page.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry, Neil, I've jumped in twice. I need to go now. Thanks ever so much, Phil.
Okay. Have a good one.
Just an observation, Phil. When somebody starts in and starts ragging me about what I call the FT, not ham radio, I say, there is a solution. And they look at me and say, well, what is it? I said, it's called the on-off switch.
I'm kind of, the FT8 thing, I think hey, it works. I don't knock it. But I kind of like the PSK 31 where you actually got to have a conversation. And it wasn't, entirely mechanical. You press this button and you press this button and you press this button. Now, I'll tell you what is fascinating is that there are people out there who have patched versions of WSJTX that essentially automate the entire process, including transmitting unattended and all of this little stuff. It turns out, of course, those people really stand out in terms of the number of times they appear in the logs over 24 hours that, you hear them in every quarter hour of the day. And you go, that's not a real person. So there's a bunch of people who don't play by the rules, and you can find some of them by data mining this data, but it's not, that's not my shtick. I'm sure there are people who would want to do that, but.
Any other questions from anybody? Well, I think that'll wrap it up. I can't thank you enough. A great presentation. I'm sure everybody learned a great deal, and you got some new users that'll come online with your program.
Cool. Do you want me to mail you the slides?
I think the slides are actually, all of it's been recorded, and one of our people will put it up on YouTube next week.
Okay, cool.
But thank you.
Okay. Cheers then.
All right. Stay well.
Thank you so much.
I've got a question for you, Bob.
Go ahead.
Can I borrow $50?
It checks in the mail.
Yeah, right. If you sent it by the mail, there is no guarantee the U.S. useless post office will ever deliver it.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Well, you're all welcome. Always looking for new suggestions. Um, got a fellow coming up next month talking about satellites. Should be kind of interesting.
Yeah. Dallas, I look forward to the Ham Fest.
Which one?
Oh, I was talking to Dallas. He's in Loganville, Georgia. It's called I call it the Stoned Mountain Ham Fest. It's Stone Mountain, and a really nice club, good bunch of guys and ladies, and they do a jam up Ham Fest and always have.
I noticed that our biggest one here, CPAC, is already starting to send out
Yes.
emails.
Yeah, that's one I've always wanted to attend, but never was able to do it, or combine it with a business trip before I retired. The CTAC's pretty active.
It's a good one.
Yeah,
3 days.
I think the other one, Bruce, that's excellent, is the Visalia DX convention, I guess they call it. That's a goodie. Okay.
Well, I've been making progress with my setup. It's getting better. I've got Log4OM and WSJTX and JT Alert all working together. And I've also got it working with Grid Tracker, but I can't get all 4 of them to work together yet. So, Philip talked about UDP, and that's the whole thing. Is it's probably easier on the programmer, but it's more challenging on the user if you have a bunch of programs you're trying to get set up.
Yeah.
It's getting there.
Okie dokie. Almost
Bob, you're a
dinner
big
time.
FT8 guy. You ought to try CatSync.
Say again?
I was suggesting to Bob that he try this CatSync utility.
Bruce, I'm still struggling trying to get my new computer to talk with WSJT and Grid Tracker, and I can't get it to work. So
how much help have you had on that?
I'm sorry?
How much help have you had with that?
Unfortunately, a ton, and no one's been able to figure it out.
Huh.
So, and it may be the fact that I've got this Super Legenda V12 computer that may not react the way other more basic computers do, and that may be the problem. We'll have to delve into that somewhat. I think someone had mentioned a UDP, whatever the hell that is.
Well, UDP is a protocol. It's a communication protocol that WSJTX uses with other utilities like Grid Tracker.
Right. But I don't know what the UDP in my computer is to set it up so it'll work with the Grid Tracker, and that may be the problem. I don't know. We've tried everything else. So, anywho.
Well, once I'm done tweaking mine, I've been building up a little PowerPoint slides that show how I show the linkages and the settings in my tools. So once I make sure that's working, I'll be happy to share that if it has any value.
Okay, that would be great.
But CatSync doesn't require those. Well, you use Ham Radio Deluxe, if I recall.
No, DX Keeper.
DX Keeper. Okay.
DX Labs.
I'm the one who uses Ham Radio Deluxe, and back when Simon was involved, so I've been with it for many years.
Both of those, I believe, use their own internal cat interfaces.
Yes.
which is a challenge because if you want to have other stuff around those, it makes it like CatSync uses OmniRig and only OmniRig. So that's where you get into the other confusion of multiple virtual serial ports and sharing ports, and that gets messy also. Which is why I wish the whole industry would, even though I know Philip doesn't like TCP/IP because it's more complicated programming, but it sure would make blending programs easier if all of them were using TCP communications and not UDP, but maybe someday. Anyway, well, thanks again, Bob, for putting that together. That was
Absolutely
interesting. And let me know when it's time to go tackle that antenna again.
Yeah, well, I'm just waiting to hear from Russ when he's free, and we'll get the team together. Thanks.
By the way, my son is now working 5/8 instead of 4/10s, so he does not have Fridays open anymore. If you needed him, we'd probably have to do it on a weekend.
Right. Well, I'm still free on the weekends.
So, well, every day Saturday, right?
Exactly. Every day is Saturday. You got it.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thanks. I'm going to bug out.
All right. Anybody else got anything to add?
Hey, Bob, it looks like I think you recorded this, not me.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I couldn't get it to let you record it. I don't know why or what I was missing, but I recorded it to my computer so I can shoot it to you and you can do your magic whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'll get in touch tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. All right, guys. I guess we'll pull the plug till next week. You guys have a good week.
See you later.
Stay well. 7-3.